We want to take a look at our learning enterprise model that we think can really help sort of structure all this and make sense to it. This is kind of typically, if we looked at the old way of doing learning and development, basically you have learning programs that you offered and a formal way of rolling those out, which may be ILT, which may be some e-learning courses as well, and the disciplines that allow that to occur, and various technical tools and technology, which may be an LMS, an LCMS, and e-learning authoring tools, for example. The organization governance and management of this is fairly standard in terms of the learning organization. We talked about organizations right now are going through a lot of assessment and restructuring of their organizations to enable more informal learning and to adjust to the economic conditions around it. Learning architectures are very, very important that we see in organizations' work. But basically what a learning architecture does is it allows you to differentiate between what types of tools and development tools you have and programs, so that you have a program come in. In fact, Tony mentioned this, trying to decide whether it's going to be an e-learning course, it's going to be a webinar, it's going to be a Second Life City. How do you make those decisions? By creating a learning architecture, you're able to very quickly identify within your instructional design process that this is if we're going to have a new hire orientation program, we are going to do this type of collaborative tool, we're going to do a WebEx session, and then a follow-up session. So looking at and identifying your learning architecture and how you're going to make those decisions on the tools you use is very important. It's a little bit easier in this situation because typically e-learning may be a blended learning virtual classroom. But as you start to get more into formal learning, it's going to be that much more complex. Actually, Reuters does a great job. Anyone from Reuters here? Thomson Reuters, right? You have a learning architecture that you work with, informal on one side and formal on the other, and it's a very good program that it allows you to make those types of decisions when you're going to, what type of modalities you're going to use for each course, right? Okay. So now, in our new model here, we start to take a look at how do we capture that 80% of learning that you know out there is taking place through networks and peer-to-peer networking and discussions and collaboration, and tie it into the overall architecture. We still have our learning programs. We talked about through our four models of the evolution of learning that these programs are now becoming much more strategic, much more talent-driven programs, and they're really focused on the value to the business. But we also see something up here too. It's called audiences and problems. So we're really solving, learning has to solve problems. It has to solve an immediate business problem. Right? And that's kind of a big shift for learning and development organizations, especially those that have been very traditional, in that old model. We now need to focus and get out and have conversations with business leaders from the talent perspective, identify what's critical for them, and then create learning operations that are going to meet their overall needs. So we're now looking at what problems are solving, and then what audiences are we going to focus on. Right? So not all audiences are necessarily going to provide the most value. A lot of organizations right now are segmenting their population by what's critical or critical roles. One large healthcare provider has actually 10 different roles that they've segmented their organization into, and that comprises about 25% of their actual population. And so when they make the resource decisions and development decisions, they're really focusing on that 25%. The 75% is still getting orientation training, getting product training, those types of things, but less and less of the development areas, because business knows that these 10 roles really drive the majority of revenue and profit for the organization. Has any group really segmented your population or gotten to roles yet? If someone out there, you have done that? Okay. And it's still fairly new. I would suspect that someone in your HR group is going to start looking at doing this, and that's definitely going to impact how you focus your resources towards learning. The disciplines certainly now start to get a little more difficult because you have communities, right? So now you have to have someone who's going to manage those communities, going to manage the data around communities as well too. So your organizational structure is going to start to change as you bring informal learning into it and try to make this more of a formal learning perspective. Tools and technologies are getting more and more complex. Now looking at collaborative tools, wikis, blogs, bringing chat into your classroom as well. And the culture, we found that learning culture is probably one of the biggest, if not the most significant factor for a learning organization to be successful. So if you have a strong learning culture, the likelihood that your learning organization is going to be successful in what it does and implementing these types of programs will increase greatly. And learning cultures are really supported by executive involvement, championing, having the right resources in place for people to learn, having the time to learn. That's one of the hardest things for people right now, your end users of learning, is they just don't have enough time. And that's why informal learning and working with them and offering informal learning solutions can really make their lives a lot easier. So if I can go in and just pick up the information I need, or listen to a recorded WebEx, or whatever I'm going to be doing, or join a network group and peers, and subscribe to wikis, for example, then it's going to make my life much easier. So that's how the learning organization is really changing and can really support and champion what's occurring and how people want to learn. So when we pull this all together, we kind of look at it in 3 different segments of informal learning. The first being on-demand, the second being social, and the third being embedded, which we've talked quite a bit about. And the on-demand is just that my interest to access learning as I need it. So formal can certainly include ILT, virtual training. It can also include e-learning. But on-demand may also include a Google search of text and information. It may include e-learning modules that I can go in and access, or recorded WebEx, for example. So it's including on-demand. Social learning, obviously, we talked quite a bit about in terms of collaboration tools and wikis and blogs. And then embedded learning, like performance support, is all part of this. It could be quality circles, for example, enable people to learn. But as we do this, we're starting to structure all that informal learning that's happening out there. And now we can start to bring that into our overall enterprise learning architecture and our structure. So this is an entirely different model than we've been used to in the past from the learning organizational perspective. And there's different resources, different disciplines that come in to support it, new technologies. It gives us a little different perspective on how all the social learning and things we looked at earlier and some of those futuristic approaches can really tie into learning organizational structures. How does this strike people when you look at this? And is this something that you could socialize within your group and people can understand? Does it look like something that would work in your organization? Does it make sense to see on-demand, social, and embedded and informal learning is all part of formal, as part of the overall learning architecture? This structure can enable you to start to say, now that as we create new courses and look at new problems that we're solving, new learning programs, some are going to be social, some are going to be embedded in the workforce, some will be formal training as well. But that really starting to structure or formalize that 80%. Not going to go through all this by any means, but it kind of gives you a perspective. I believe you're going to post this on your website too, so you can all download this content as well. But certainly you can see how the disciplines, the structure, and the resources change quite a bit as you start to pull in informal learning into your overall architecture. Certainly we talked about mobile learning, social networking are all new areas that are coming into the learning organization. Performance support, which is oftentimes kind of outside of learning too, that EPSS, it's more almost in the realm of knowledge management. There's a lot of great tools out there in terms of performance support that learning professionals really should be looking at and bringing into the organization. So you're now starting to structure that within your overall learning architecture. Certainly virtual classroom and virtual environments too.